Welcome to Ancient Geeks, a podcast in which two geeks of a certain age reflect on their younger selves when we discovered all the wonderful geekiness that was out there before it became mainstream. We were geeks before it was chic. I'm the goddamn Tom Grant, your
and you
co-host.
stole my goddamn joke.
Oh, I'm sorry. We should check with each other beforehand. I mean, maybe that one was too obvious.
Yeah, it was too obvious. I'm your goddamn co-host, Stephen Taylor, and the fun usually is trying to get you to laugh when I make the dumb jokes. That's why I don't want to share ahead of time. But
well, same here. Anyway, so that is a reference to one of the comics we're going to be talking about today in this episode. For those who don't know what we're giggling about here. All right. But as usual, before we get into the topic du jour, let's talk about things that we've been doing lately that fall under the penumbra of geekiness. So, Stephen, what was your geek life like in the last week or so?
The only geekiness, apart from preparing for this, is preparing for future episodes. I've been reading the first Zelazny Amber series, which I'm almost done with. And then all my other spare time is going to painting a fence, a goddamn fence. It's taken forever. But anyway...
How would Frank Castle paint that fence?
With automatic weapons, and it would be done because he wouldn't be there anymore.
He would have an automatic paint sprayer.
Well, with a paint gun. Yeah,
a paint sprayer that looked like an Uzi. Okay. Well, what I've been doing is I rewatched Tron on a whim. So since the new Tron movie came out and reviews were not good, I wanted to reflect on my young geek self, as is the wont of both of us in this podcast. And so I rewatched Tron, and I would say it was remarkably okay, not great. I
haven't seen the original in a very long time. I did see the second one that came out, which was very visually appealing, but not very memorable otherwise. It was almost like one big music video. I thought the soundtrack was fantastic, actually. But
apparently that I have not seen that, but everyone mentions the Nine Inch Nails soundtrack as being fantastic.
No, it was Daft Punk.
Oh, Daft Punk. Okay. Nine Inch Nails is the most recent one.
Yeah, I haven't seen the most recent one.
My bad. See,
no.
I sound so old. You know, here I am trying to sound hip, saying, "Well, there's the Nine Inch Nails soundtrack." But what do I know? I attributed it to the wrong movie. I haven't seen the other movie, obviously, but the original Tron was okay. I mean, the acting wasn't great. It kind of dragged in parts. Mm-hmm. You know, I think whenever you look at somebody else's review of that movie, the word visionary comes up, which I would say so. I mean, it was visually amazing, especially for the time, but it was pretty okay.
My fondest memories of Tron from my youth were the video games. I like
the video games.
The light cycle game in particular, but also with the discs. It was good stuff.
Yeah, the light cycle game I was addicted to for a short time. All right. Well, speaking of soundtracks that we can attribute correctly to the episode at hand, so we're talking today about dark superheroes, and this was a bit of a thing back when we were young. We're going to talk a bit about how relevant it is to today. But for dark superheroes, what is your soundtrack, if we could afford to actually use it in this podcast?
So I'm going with "We Don't Need Another Hero" by Tina Turner.
Oh, you just got right to it.
Yes.
You just nailed it. I went all over the place. I bounced around like a pachinko ball on this one. And so I had, maybe some really terrible heavy metal, and I'm not a heavy metal person. So I had to Google bad heavy metal. And so the group Cannibal Corpse came up as a possible mention. I said, nah, maybe not that. So then I said, oh, I know what. There was that song that Jason Aldean did.
Yes.
Like a year or two ago, that was, come to our small town and we'll beat the hell out of you.
Yes.
Try that in a small town. And I said, okay, getting closer. And then I thought, okay, Black Rebel Motorcycle Club's Beat the Devil's Tattoo, which is a group I actually do know. That might be good. But I kind of then finally settled on Nina Simone's classic Strange Fruit, which I think if there is a song about vigilante violence, that's the song.
That's the song. The song. I actually wrote about try that in a small town on outside the Beltway. I can't talk now. Those of you who are interested
Outside the Beltway.
Outside the Beltway. Yeehaw. Where I write about politics on a regular daily basis.
Like and subscribe.
Like and subscribe, exactly.
Okay, so let's get into dark superheroes. And this is actually an important topic. I mean, there are points in this conversation where we're going to be laughing at certain elements of it that are ridiculous, or certain species of it that are kind of laughable. But it is, I think, a very serious topic. So in the 1980s and the 1990s, when we were youngsters and we were going to the comic store to get our monthly haul or weekly haul of comics that had just been released, the comic companies, particularly Marvel and DC, really pushed hard this idea of dark superheroes.
Right.
And then Image Comics came around as a new company competing with Marvel and DC. A couple of dissatisfied artists and writers went to this new company, and they really heavily stressed dark superheroes. And we've talked about vigilantes already. We said the V word, and we'll get into a more clear definition of what dark superheroes were and what they were like at the time and what they might be like today. But certainly, again, I want to say this is important because the amount of grimdark in popular culture has certainly increased in the past decade, couple of decades. The popularity of, I would say, sort of fairly brutal dark popular culture like Game of Thrones, which had lots and lots of violence and rape and other nasty things. I also think that there is an attitude that many people have, whether it's explicit or implicit, that the nastier you depict reality, the more authentic or honest you're being somehow.
Right.
That is, as I said, an unstated hypothesis or a mindset or whatever you want to call it, that I think animates a lot of both the production and consumption of culture today.
Oh, I think that's exactly what's going on in Game of Thrones.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of current events that are certainly being steered in a direction by concepts of toughness and cleaning up the streets. And other sorts of motifs of dark superheroes and their offshoots in other genres as well. And a lot of people just genuinely like ultra violence in their popular culture.
Right.
Which you'll hear from both of us that doesn't include the hosts of this podcast.
No.
But there is a market out there for slasher movies and other things that are extremely dark.
Yes.
All right. Actually, there was a very funny clip I saw yesterday that somebody tried to do like a sequel to the Monster Mash, but instead of like kooky mummies and werewolves, it was the characters from Saw and the Human Centipede and so forth. And the singer was in a Frankenstein costume. It's like, oh my God, what happened? Anyway, this isn't the Halloween I knew. All right. So that's what we mean and why we think it's important, what we mean at the highest possible level. And I think that, well, anyway, let's get into the definition before we start.
Yeah, let's do that.
So we talked a lot about this before we started recording this podcast.
Right.
I think it does start definitely with a particular attitude towards violence. And you and I are going to have a little bit of a debate maybe about how much farther it goes. Right. But an attitude about violence, and I'll stop talking here in a moment and give you a chance, less hesitation about killing, which I think was, from a comic book perspective, very conspicuous because, of course, Superman always captured Lex Luthor and dropped him in prison. And, Batman always did the same with the Joker and dropped him into Arkham Asylum. And they very explicitly said, we're not going to kill anybody. Right. That's our code as superheroes. And that was true across the board in the 1960s up until the 1970s, I would say, started to see a little bit of a change. But anyway, in both Marvel and DC comics, I think that there is also a as I mentioned, sort of an implicit philosophy about toughness, about preventing the Joker or whoever it is from getting out again, and this fear about the revolving door of crime. That the jails couldn't hold them, and all these thugs and punks and other synonyms for what we're talking about here is the adversaries. That kind of had to put it into that particular problem with harsh measures. There was also a sense that violence was very regenerative in some ways. That's actually the title of a book about the American West, Regeneration Through Violence by Richard Slotkin, which is, I think, an effort to try to depict this in a very deep cultural sense for the United States. And also, too, that, these dark superheroes, the villains themselves became much nastier.
Yes.
And more capable of doing awful things. It wasn't just the Weather Wizard or the Mirror Master stealing some pearls from a jewelry shop. It was Zaz and the Joker and so forth doing unspeakable things to their victims.
That's right. That's exactly right.
All right. So what would you say about the violence part that I haven't said?
So, I mean, and this may open up this debate. It's not really a debate, but I think, like our conversation of fan service and some other things, we both have these sort of general ideas about this topic, but it's not necessarily fully shared or even totally developed. Because to me, I mean, you hit the core of it, and we do agree on that. The core of it is about levels of violence in it, and I think probably the most significant variable in all of it is whether the heroes are willing to kill people or not, to mete out justice, whatever that may mean in this context. I think for me, I started thinking about, when we first brought up this topic of dark superheroes, was some combination of a general aesthetic, what I might term as seriousness or attempts at seriousness, both faux and real, and then the violence part. So I kind of look at it partially as this evolution, and I see it as coming about mostly in the 1980s. And the things that come to my mind when we first started talking about this were a lot of things written and or drawn by Alan Moore and Frank Miller, whether it was Alan Moore's Swamp Thing, or whether it was Frank Miller's early work on Daredevil, but then later, Moore's Watchmen or Batman the Killing Joke or the aforementioned All-Star Batman and Robin the Boy Wonder, which is where the goddamn Batman thing comes from, which we'll probably come back to. Or, the Miller's Dark Knight Returns, Batman Year One, and things that I haven't read, but I'm familiar with in passing because of their pop culture significance, things like Sin City and the 300. All of these things, to me, combine some combination of, we're going to tell a more serious comic book story than we told, especially in the 60s, but even the 70s. There's some of this in the 70s, when we've mentioned on the podcast before, Neil Adams' Batman or the Green Lantern, Green Arrow series that dealt with some serious topics. That we started to see some more seriousness in the 70s, but the 80s, there's this turn, and a lot of it is, as you indicated, more with the villains. There's more violence from the villains, which then justifies in some ways the violence of the main characters.
Yes.
So, for example, just to put an example on the table, Wolverine, who we talked about some during the first two. We've done 2 episodes on the X-Men, and Wolverine's a pivotal character, and he's got some his powers include these razor sharp claws that can cut through anything, which is in combat definitionally means people are getting killed. It was always kind of a little coy about it in the comics as to who was getting killed and who wasn't getting killed.
Mostly started out as anonymous goons.
Yeah, anonymous goons, or maybe they were robots, or maybe they were superpowered in some ways, or maybe they're just being disabled. We're not really quite sure. I made the joke when we talked the other day. It reminded me of the A-Team when a helicopter would blow up and fall to the sky, but we had to make sure we showed a shot of the people getting out of the helicopter before, because we don't kill anybody.
Don't worry, kids.
Don't worry, kids. No one got killed. But then, to pick one of the things that we looked at was the Wolverine miniseries in the early 80s, which Chris Claremont wrote, but Frank Miller drew. And it was at the time, seminal, I think, comic series. But one of the things that struck me about it, and it's quite clear that he's killing people in this comic, but they're all assassins. I mean, what else can you do with an assassin except kill them back? I mean, that's what they're there to kill you.
And they're literally faceless.
Yeah, and they are faceless too.
Yeah, they're ninjas. I mean, so one of the chief foes of Daredevil and Wolverine has been the Hand,
Yes.
and they're just basically ninjas in red outfits.
And what are you going to talk to the Hand? No, 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 no.
Yeah.
You're going to take him out.
What was the Ticks version of the Hand? Was it the?
Oh, I think it was was that the
That was the Ninja Turtles. Was the
Teenage
foot?
Mutant with the
Yeah,
foot? Yeah.
yeah. But there was somebody else like that in at least one issue of the Tick. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah.
Just lightening the mood temporarily before
But
we
yeah, it
continue
is
down this dark trail here.
So, I mean, part of the question too, right, is when it does come to this killing thing, is to what degree is there justifiable violence because of the violence that's being deployed against you versus people like Frank Castle who show up guns ablazing and good Lord.
Right.
So, it's an interesting combination. So I guess to me, part of this conversation is then the way in which this sort of attempt at more seriousness, because again, we're talking about these guys that are operating in the shadows and they're working at night. So it stands to reason that Batman or Daredevil would be the kinds of characters that would be more quote unquote dark, both aesthetically, but also maybe in what they're dealing with, and therefore tempted to more violence. But also this sort of shift over time that we've talked about in the podcast from like the super silly comics of the 1950s and 60s, especially DC. And then the attempt by Marvel to be more serious in the 60s, but then into the 70s and into the 80s, again, this sort of really sort of examination of some of this stuff. It's pretty dark. I mean, Watchmen's a pretty dark story. Yes. Batman, The Dark Knight Returns is a pretty dark story, right? These are so,
lots of particularly sadistic,
yes,
uncontrolled villains on the leaders, and then again all these anonymous goons that get shredded one way or another, whether it's by Wolverine's claws or 9mm bullets from the Punisher.
Yeah, or when the Batmobile in The Dark Knight Returns is basically a large armored vehicle.
Yeah.
So then all this then I think plays into two other strains, right? And we'll talk more about one than the other, but I think the other is worth mentioning. Mm-hmm. One is that the 90s become this really crazy era of comics, right, where I think both of us kind of bailed for various reasons, not necessarily because of this, but it didn't help.
Well, it can definitely contributed for me. It definitely.
And then the way in which it impacted superhero cinema and whatnot, where not only did it literally take on, in many cases, a much more dark color palette, whether it's the X-Men movies or certainly all the Snyder stuff, but also, an increased presence of violence and some ambiguity, if not taking the ambiguity away about these things. I think back, and I don't remember, like in the second Tim Burton Batman movie, the Batmobile has guns.
Yes.
For example, things like that. And then this would then roll into these characters, which then links up, and which you alluded to, and we'll talk about, I think, in multiple ways, the way in which this sort of creates this sort of ethos of a particular kind of violence directed toward quote unquote justice, because we know who the bad guys are. I mean, this is kind of this core theme. We know who the bad guys are, and we know what they deserve, and we don't need any, dare I say, due process at this point. We just need to mete out justice summarily at the moment with impunity, which, as you've already alluded to, is something that we're seeing actually in politics right now in a real way, not a fantasy way.
Yeah. And I would say, so maybe to bookend this in time, from when arguably a lot of this emphasis on dark superheroes started to when you and I started to bail on comics. And as I said, for me, this definitely had a role in making me less interested in reading a lot of comics. So I would say the Daredevil Bullseye storyline, when Frank Miller was writing and drawing that, for those who don't know, Daredevil is a street level hero. I'm doing air quotes here, which people can't see, street. And that just meant it wasn't somebody with like massive superpowers like Thor or Superman or somebody like that. He was a guy who was blind, but he had this incredible extra sense that he had, and he was very physically fit, and he was a great fighter. And Bullseye was this assassin, a psychopath. Daredevil kept trying to end him as a problem. And there was an issue of Daredevil where he's given the choice of possibly just letting this guy die. And I would say that's the beginning,
Right.
maybe
Right. No, it is.
arbitrarily. This,
Right.
there's never like a one, very clear point. But I would say, and then in the 90s, it would be when you had kind of the Rob Liefeld
Yes.
uh, sort of couture becoming the visual embodiment of this. People with lots of edged weapons and big guns, and they're drawn in this sort of ridiculously muscular way, and they've got
And pouches. Lots of pouches.
Yes, pouches presumably for ammunition,
Sure.
shoulder pads, big on shoulder pads. And
Yes.
everyone's kind of snarling all the time. And it's
Yes.
just sort of this, again, sort of like vigilante rage in kind of fueling everything that you're looking at in these comics. And it wasn't just Liefeld. I don't want to pick him out, but he was such an awful artist and he was so representative of this strain of comics at the time. I will pick on him a little bit for that.
Oh, he was emblematic of the 90s. There's just no doubt about it. And the art in particular was just did not appeal to me.
Yeah. I think also too there was that I don't remember the exact year, but you and I joked about this before, that era when Marvel was trying to add a little juice to the Fantastic Four, which maybe was not as popular as it should have been, and so they all had guns.
No, it sticks in my head. There's a scene, and I don't know who the artist was, but it was Liefeld-esque, of Sue Storm or Sue Richards with her like one-piece bathing suit version of her costume with thigh-high boots, and the 4 is cut out into a boob window, and she's got guns. It's like none of this makes any sense.
It's not the male gaze; it's the 13-year-old boy gaze.
Oh, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, but everybody else has guns too. The Thing, it's absurd.
Yes.
Just absurd. But anyway, that's what they thought their audience wanted. So before we get into a list of whom we think these dark superheroes from our youth are, and kind of mention them by name, I also want to say that sometimes when people talk about dark superheroes, they also mean mature. And there go the air quotes.
Yeah.
Mature. And so that could be the depiction of drugs, sex, mental illness, addiction, torture, mutilation, awful things in the comics, which originally, because of the comic code, for a long time was something you never did, right? You just did, 60s and 70s. You would basically lose your ability to sell your comics if you depicted some of these things. And then, we've talked before about Green Lantern, Green Arrow, and the depiction of drugs, and then Spider-Man at the same time. Anyway, starting to erode those particular strictures. I would also say that mature could also mean that superheroes behave like grown-ups.
Yes.
And they have adult concerns. And I think like a lot of DC characters in the 80s and 90s were good examples of this. Like the Justice Society, because they were older people, they would have marriages that had fallen apart, or they had kids and they had problems with their kids and so forth. I don't think that's necessarily what we're talking about.
No.
I think that the drug, sex, mental illness, et cetera, plays a lot into the attitudes towards violence because it's part of the justification for it.
Right. I mean, what I would add from my perspective is that I think all of these things are kind of it's a balance because part of it is again more realistic or more serious, as the term that I keep using. Stories might take a deeper look at crime and what crime is, rather than just some scheme to knock over a liquor store to get some cash.
Right.
The Weathered Wizard example, or Captain Boomerang. But rather the fact that let's say the Daredevil is a great example. So the Daredevil run that we're talking about, which I did go back and review, didn't have time to review the entire run, but I reviewed quite a bit and I've read it before. This is taking sort of seriously the notion of organized crime in the greater New York area, and Kingpin's role in this sort of mafia, and some pretty violent things going on back and forth between him and some of his rivals. And so that then it sparks, again, a darker, more noir-esque kind of approach to the comic, right? The art is dark, not in the sense we're using the term, but it is, the color palette is darker. It's shadows and it's It's the
Right.
way Miller draws, and Klaus Jensen, his inks really,
Hmm.
I think, emphasize that, right?
Oh, definitely. Yeah,
So
heavy inks, dark.
yeah,
The colorists were always doing dark colors, as you said.
lots of silhouettes and
Yeah.
things like that, and so that's fine, right? Again, I mean, it makes sense for a character like Daredevil or Batman to be depicted in that way. But part of the issue for me becomes how much does it push the envelope just for the sake of maybe, I don't know, just shock value, for lack of a better word. I don't think that's quite the word that I want, or pushing these characters beyond the acceptable
Yeah.
for the purposes of just making it, just over the top,
Right.
right?
So mentioning Daredevil, I just had a thought. If you go back to the 1960s, Daredevil had villains like the Stilt Man, hilariously, and other kinds of like goofy
Yeah.
level of goofiness is the Weather Wizard or Captain Boomerang. But do you remember the Gladiator?
He shows up with the Frank Miller run, but I don't remember his original one.
So Gladiator was somebody who basically had a circular saw on each wrist.
That's one does.
And right. And I remember like seeing that as a kid, and I started reading a lot of older back issue comics and thinking, boy, Daredevil better take that guy down. That's terrible.
Right.
That he can just like cut anybody he wants to ribbons. So there you go from like the 1960s with the Gladiator to the 1990s with a lot of the dark superheroes saying circular saws. How amusing, how
How
quaint.
amusing.
And
Yeah,
these are the heroes, right? Not
that's
the
right.
villain that you
That's right.
wanted to see removed from, any sort of threat that he could present to innocent bystanders or the protagonist.
Yeah,
Okay, so go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, I was just going to say one thing as I'm looking at it right now. If you're not familiar, or you've forgotten, I think if you look up, and you don't have to have the Marvel app to do this. You can. There's databases online, but you look at the covers of Daredevil prior to Frank Miller taking over. They're much
Oh,
more standard covers.
you're right.
And part of it's his artistic style, but I mean, just the kinds of things that you see on the Daredevil covers after that. I mean, it's it's much more kinetic, but also much more violent. But also there, the scene like with Elektra has her sigh through his cowl, or
Yeah,
Daredevil with a gun, or being attacked by ninjas. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Even there's a good John Byrne cover. He's beaten up Bullseye, and he's in a cast, and he's bloody. It's
right.
the whole. It's just different, and
Yeah.
it's visually clear that it's different.
All right, so let's go through a list of dark superheroes from this time period. And I think we're going to move from no doubt whatsoever that this particular character is a dark superhero to some that are more on the fringes, and we might,
Right.
say that doesn't belong in the neighborhood of dark superheroes. Okay, so we mentioned the Punisher, definitely.
Oh yeah, it doesn't get much more.
Okay, and we've mentioned already Wolverine.
Hmm.
What about Venom?
Yeah, Venom, and as a character, I mean, I'm well aware of Venom and his origins, and I had that stuff. I still have those comics, but I think I think he fits in that category. He's like, weirdly, at some point, he's a villain and he's kind of an anti-hero. I guess he just becomes a dark
Yeah.
superhero at some point. I don't know. I think you read more recent Venom than I did.
Yeah, well, we can stick to the past, the 80s and 90s.
Right,
There
right.
again, he was a definite villain.
Yes.
Uh, and then I think because he was such a popular character,
Yes.
uh,
Yes.
they wanted to do more with him, and they couldn't keep him as a villain, so they made him
Hmm.
into a dark superhero, an
Yes.
anti-hero of some sort. Ghost Rider.
Ghost Rider, I think. So Ghost Rider is interesting to me, and he fits into a category. I think you read Ghost Rider at the time.
Yes, I
Is that
did.
not? And I did
Yes.
not. I mean, I encountered Ghost Rider. I never was all that interested in Ghost Rider, but there is this whole category of 70s Marvel heroes that are these supernatural,
Hmm.
say, son of Satan, and Ghost Rider come to mind. There's some others that I'm forgetting right now.
Well, even ones where the supernatural element isn't the hero, like Dracula.
Oh yeah.
Dracula killed people.
Yes.
That's
So,
that
but
was
I
that
think,
was his jam.
I mean, he is hell powered, right? So I guess he's
Yeah.
he's pretty dark to begin with. Although I read the first couple of issues of the original comic, they're deathly boring to me.
Which, the Tomb of Dracula?
Ghost Rider, Ghost Rider.
Oh, Ghost Rider, terrible. I
Yeah,
reread them for this.
the art is awful, and the writing is like
Yeah,
I don't didn't do it for me.
no, it's very flat, very cliche.
Yes.
Uh, it's bad.
Yep.
Yeah, and like very uninteresting villains too.
Agreed.
Yeah. Okay. So Ghost Rider, I would put him in the
Oh yeah,
list,
I think so.
particularly by the '90s, when
Sure.
they rebooted Ghost Rider. Definitely, he was giving people the penance stare, and then if they happened to die, that was fine by him.
That's right.
How about Spawn?
I think Spawn fits.
Yeah.
That fits that whole '90s vibe. That's Todd McFarlane's independent after the Spider-Man stuff.
Yeah. And
Comic.
in my brain, Spawn and Venom,
Venom, yeah, yeah, absolutely.
whom Todd McFarlane drew originally, are very close together.
I agree, yeah.
Yeah,
I
even
mean, he
though
has.
one's a symbiote and the other is a supernatural hero.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I think undoubtedly Judge Dredd
Oh,
falls into this
absolutely.
category.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which is interesting because it was meant to be a parody of what we're talking about, but I don't think everybody read it that way.
No, but then well, there are also those people that didn't know that Homelander was the bad guy until it took a while to settle that into people. So,
That's really gobsmacking, but we
but
may come back to
nonetheless,
that. We may come back to that. So I would say, to go back a little earlier, there was a run in Adventure Comics of the Spectre. I forgot who wrote it, but it was drawn by Jim Aparo, who I
okay,
always
yeah.
liked as an artist,
Yeah, yeah.
where it was somewhere between superhero comics and horror comics, which were a
Hmm.
big thing that DC did. House of Mystery, House of Secrets, and every cover had the Spectre causing the really bizarre, horrible death of somebody. So the flesh would run off their bones and it would just be a skeleton, or they'd burst into flames or whatever. Anyway, it was really sort of,
Right.
yeah, awful stuff. But that was the Spectre as another kind of spirit of vengeance.
Yeah, there's this whole category. I guess this is kind of what I was getting at with Ghost Rider or with Son of Satan or whatever. Um, There's this weird category of like the supernatural, and it does sort of partially range into horror.
Yeah,
Might get put this Alan Moore Swamp Thing in this category. It's dark in that sense,
right.
although it's still not to me the same thing as the Punisher.
Hmm.
The Punisher may be the apotheosis of all of this. I don't know. Maybe there's somebody else we can think
Right.
of, but at least in terms of mainstream comics, not the DC Marvel comics.
Yeah, and also like the Man Thing. So Man Thing was another swamp
Yeah.
creature, like Swamp Thing, and but he was much less intelligent. And the thing you saw every issue of Man Thing was whoever knows fear burns at the Man Thing's
Yes.
touch.
Yes.
So it was always a bad person who was feeling
That's right.
fear because Man Thing loomed up, and they said, "Oh my God, I was in the middle of robbing this liquor store, and
Well, as
doing
you
something
know,
terrible to this woman, and now the Man Thing touches me and I burst into flames."
criminals are a fearful, superstitious lot.
That's right. Yes. But kind of the all right. So the underlying message of Man Thing was it's better to have a shambling swamp monster cause people to burst into flames than not.
Sure.
That's
Stands to
that's that's
reason.
a particular mindset.
It is a mindset.
Lobo, I think, definitely goes on the list.
Hmm.
Another character who began as a villain, became popular, and then
Yes.
the publisher decided to turn them into something, not a traditional hero, but something. Batman and the Dark Knight Returns. We've already
Yes.
alluded to that. I think that's a definite yes. What about Batman in general?
So Batman, I think, is another one. As we've already noted, there's sort of other iterations of Batman in different books, but and I have in my return to comics reading in the last several years, have through the DC app gone back to read a number of Batman comics in this gap, and I've always had a hard time figuring out where to reinsert myself. But my impression of Batman in really from the 90s onward, and it varies somewhat by the writer and by the book, but he becomes a much more brooding kind of, I don't know, in his own head kind of dark-ish hero. He doesn't kill people to my knowledge, although there are probably stories where he has, other places where he avoids it. But it just feels like, I mean, again, the sort of maybe the very sort of high mark or low mark, depending how you want to put it, is the All-Star Batman and Robin, which I only read the first issue, where he's bonkers crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the whole, the goddamn Batman line where he basically kidnaps Dick Grayson after his parents have been killed. Instead of being this figure who swoops in and sort of saves his kid, he's like, you're a soldier. It's gross.
Yeah, you're a child soldier in my war on crime.
Yeah. And he's unhinged. And
yes.
That's pretty dark in my mind. Now, I will make a contrast, and I've only read the first issue because it only had come out on the second issue's hit the app yet or not. But there's a new run of Batman by Matt Fraction, which I would recommend. Mm-hmm. In the first issue, he is like, I won't say it's the opposite of dark, but it is a confrontation with Killer Croc that is not what you would expect it to be.
Okay.
And
does he de-escalate it?
Yes.
That's wonderful.
So, and it is, he just felt more thoughtful and more depth instead of just I'm the dark angel of vengeance in the night kind of thing.
Right.
So I'm looking forward to seeing more of that. It's still, again, the palette is still dark and it's still at night and it's still Batman. It didn't feel like something else. It just felt like a more well-rounded Batman. And he's still kind of a jerk to some people, as Batman is wont to do, but it just felt more intelligent. And I'm forgetting the author now. When I talked about it before, with the one where he somehow manages to skip through space and come back to the Earth.
Yeah.
That whole thing, and that Batman. And I read some of those books, and they're okay, but it's a weird combination of sort of Batman is almost perfect ultimately, although not. It's about a mistake he made because this machine. But he's like he has such superpowers in terms of mental capacity and his technology. It's almost like Tony Stark on steroids, but also still, the Dark Avenger of the Night kind of. I don't know. It gets a bit convoluted in my mind. But part of it is this attitude. Like I think here's what I'm trying to say as I struggle through my thoughts. There is this, and this I think is somewhat central to this ultimate theme, which is this sort of notion that Batman knows best because he's Batman, right? And so one of the themes that I think becomes disturbing through some of these characters, especially people like the Punisher, to some degree Wolverine, maybe certainly Judge Dredd, is because we know what's best, we can execute justice on our own, and that's, I think.
Yes.
In some ways, the darkest part of all of this. I mean, that's in some ways the core of superheroes. And we've talked about a little bit, I think, with the Dark Knight Rises or Dark Knight Returns, earlier. And I'll go ahead and lay down a marker that maybe we'll come back to. This is comic books to me are kind of like football, which is if I think about it too much, maybe I should be spending my time doing something else. I love comic books and superheroes, but to some degree, the message that someone who dresses up in a costume can mete out justice outside of due process really is kind of offensive on some levels. Just like college football is a business and is not pure, and I've known that for a while. And there's the whole CTE thing, and maybe if I think about it too much, I should go, paint my fence instead. So it's, there's a weird kind of, I think, moral difficulty that gets pushed to a limit it goes beyond fantasy to something else with this dark superhero stuff in my mind. At least the ones that I really think of as going over the line, which is, as you said, the violence and the killing.
Well, I think that's a brilliant point you made, and now I'm going to slightly disagree with it.
All right.
So I think bring it, man. I've got my shoulder pads, my pouches.
That's right.
my sword with
I'll
three
keep my bladed
blades.
weapons sheathed for the moment. Let's see what you got to
Okay.
say.
Okay. So I thought always like the underlying strategy of Batman and a lot of
Hmm.
superheroes was to deliver the villains into the hands of the agents of justice,
Right.
not to deliver justice themselves.
I think that's fair to a point. I guess what I'm you're right.
But you're right
And
about the like kind of the implied hubris of just saying, okay,
no, but
I dress up
that's
in a costume, I'm a billionaire.
yeah.
I'm going to decide what's right for the world.
I mean, I agree with you
Mhm.
that at its core, it's supposed to be an ancillary and a support to law enforcement.
Yeah,
That's certainly the if we pick something else we talked about on the podcast, the Batman TV series is like we work with the
yeah,
police to help them out,
right.
and and part of the notion that there are a certain kind of criminal that is beyond the capacity of normal law enforcement to deal with, that we should therefore deal with it. But there still is ultimately, again, if you think about it too much, and as you know, we're both predisposed to think about all this too much.
Yeah,
And it's the curse of it all. But really, ultimately, though, it is this sort of unlicensed decision to get him. Is vigilantism in general? I actually think is a bad idea. How about that, right?
there we go.
So
That's a brave statement
I
there.
know, isn't it though? But although a lot of people don't necessarily think that's true,
I
right?
know. They'll especially we'll get to that.
Yeah, yeah. But so again, you think about it too much, then it becomes a bit much for me. It's a bit authoritarian. It's a bit fascistic, to be honest.
Right. Well,
But
this is what
yeah,
makes the Punisher so problematic as a
yes,
hero,
yes,
right?
yes, yes.
So we've mentioned a couple of other characters who were originally villains. That is true of the Punisher as well. Like
Yes,
he
yeah,
was a
yeah.
villain in Spider-Man. That was one of
Yes, that's
the
right.
things I reread was his
Me
first
too.
appearance in Spider-Man. And he was a little bit being manipulated by a worse character, the Jackal,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
he was still a villain, right?
yeah.
And the Punisher never evolved to the point where he was kind of turning things over, turning criminals over to whatever the
Hmm.
Marvel equivalent of Commissioner Gordon was,
Right,
and Chief O'Hara. It was just he killed him
right. Because they
in
deserved
as
it.
large a quantity as Costco sized wholesale quantity as you could possibly get away with in a comic book.
Yes. Well,
Um,
I think, and the thing that I didn't quite finish my thought, and I lost it and came back to it, and it fits here. I think what I'm getting at in terms of um, if you think about it too much, causes me some consternation. It's the same problem with a lot of even TV cop shows and movies. It is the ease by which we can identify who the bad guy is.
mhm.
And we know from criminal justice that that's not as easy
Right,
as it sounds. And
right.
that's, I think, the core deep problem here with all of this sometimes, especially if you're going to go to the point where you're going to engage in execution, is do you really know? You think you know, but how do you really know who the bad guys are? Because of the way they're dressed, because of where they happen to be, because of who they're associating with. I mean, granted, you catch some people red-handed, which often happens in the comics.
Mhm.
And the notion that Spider-Man's going to trust up someone robbing a bank and leave them for the cops, that's cool. That
Right.
works. But but even then, right? It probably makes the prosecution more difficult because of the presumption of being webbed. Does that really mean you were involved in the crime? I don't know.
Presumption of being webbed.
At any rate, um,
Spider-Man could like just say, set up a third grade teacher who he didn't like just by webbing them,
that's right.
then and
I
then
mean, if you're webbed,
call the police. Okay, well, let's finish the list because I've made a
yeah. I'm
list
sorry, you
by
made a list.
gum, and we're gonna
We're
finish
gonna,
it.
yeah.
Okay, I put the Miller era Daredevil.
Yeah, I
That
mean,
qualify?
I think it's
I'm kind
dark.
of
It's
on the
only
fence
dark.
about it.
I dark in the aesthetic sense. I think it's dark in the.
Yeah,
Again, to me, there's this line, right? There is a positive kind of dark comic,
yeah,
but I don't think that Daredevil becomes He doesn't become the Punisher. He doesn't become someone that I revile or find highly problematic. I think that's really, it's dancing on one side of a line.
Yeah.
But it's definitely more violent. I mean, it's more violent in general than the previous.
Oh yeah. Well, he's
stuff.
pushed certainly to the edge, but he still struggles.
Yes.
With with a lethal solution to New York's problems.
Now, Elektra fits.
Elektra fits definitely. I should have put her on the list, and now she is on the list. Another character I remember really enjoying during this era was the Question.
Mm-hmm.
I would argue he fits the frame here.
So I read the first several DC runs of the Question. So again, what is it? At least the ones that I read, he didn't kill anybody. There's a lot of punching people. So what is it that puts him? I just don't know. What's your
I never got a
assessment?
sense from the Question, and maybe this is more arguable than I realized. I never got a sense from the Question that he had a problem with killing people. He just didn't necessarily do it. But I didn't think his worldview prevented him from that.
No, I mean I think, but again, this is, and I don't have a strong opinion on this, and I'd read the original run years and years and years ago. But I think again it sort of fits what I'm trying to work through, which is there is this line between fists versus killing people. I mean, clearly he's beating people up, and in that way he's like Daredevil, he's like Batman to some degree. Mm-hmm. But again, this sort of notion I'm going to roam the streets and mete out justice because I know what to do.
Well, actually, okay, so I'm going to put him outside the spotlight of Dark Heroes because he also was somebody who wanted to hand villains over to the instruments of justice. Mm-hmm. Actually, his secret identity was a TV newsman who he was in part an instrument of justice in that job, that he was always doing exposés on corruption in the city and so forth. So okay, I'm gonna push him.
Well, that's a fantastical notion these days of
oh my god. Okay.
Now, by the way, his analog in Watchmen, Rorschach clearly is.
Oh yes, definitely. And so we were going to say yes to the Watchmen. No, I'm glad you jumped ahead there. This is all just for the deep insiders for comics, but I really did enjoy on the reread that his sensei was Richard Dragon, who was this minor kung fu character from the 70s when kung fu was really
I didn't catch.
Speaking of kung fu,
yes,
Shang-Chi, Master of Kung Fu. Did you read that back in the day?
I did not. I
did, and I would put him in here. He was certainly a contributor, and I think the craze for kung fu, had, I think, a role to play in this discussion. Well, and he also had these bizarre villains. Like there was a guy who he lost his hands and had to replace with blades. So like we're talking about like the kind of the even more brutal, violent, sadistic sorts of villains. I mentioned the Gladiator. This guy was like the Gladiator plus however many orders of magnitude you want to put into the discussion here.
I think it's fair to say whatever the fascination was in American pop culture starting in the 70s into the 80s for various forms of Asian martial arts fits into all this. Because again, like we said about Daredevil and with Wolverine too, that's all the Japanese stuff, but in a particular version of the Japanese stuff, the samurais and the ninjas and the assassins. But it ramps up the violence level in general, right? I mean, and Daredevil becomes more like kind of an American ninja, quite frankly.
Yes, he does.
During this period of time with so anyhow.
Okay. I also wanted to mention before we wrap up the list here, and I'll ask you if you have any more additions here in a second, but there was a role-playing game that came out in the 1980s called Champions that was a superhero role-playing game. You create your character and give them superpowers, and the games master is not running monsters like in D&D, but is running the villains. Anyway, they actually put out a Dark Champions supplement that was intended to say, okay, you take these game mechanics that were originally designed to simulate the Flash fighting the Mirror Master and now push it into the realm of the Punisher and Wolverine and other characters we've been talking about.
Right.
Any others you put on the list?
No, the only one, I mean, I'd already mentioned, I think in some ways, and it depends on, I think it's on one side of a line, but Swamp Thing, John Constantine, that kind of stuff also kind of hits me a little bit in this area.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Constantine, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay. So we might as well be discussing some other elements of culture outside the pages of comic books. So movies like Death Wish, Dirty Harry, French Connection, I think that definitely had the mindset that we're talking about.
Yes.
Action movies like RoboCop, Lethal Weapon, Commando, not the first Rambo movie, First Blood, but later Rambo movies, definitely. We've already mentioned Game of Thrones, more recently The Boys. Anything else, TV, movie wise?
No, I think that's a good list. I mean, I think the general, well, there's probably two themes that I look at that list and see. One is, which you mentioned at the top of the show, which is using brutality to try to be more realistic. I think Game of Thrones fits into that to some degree. But a lot of it, especially the first two, the movies you mentioned, a lot of it's just a particular conception of justice.
Yeah.
The justice needs to be swift and justice has to be violent. And it's the only way we can tame crime, which again is a very contemporary theme.
Yeah, the laws don't protect you; they protect the criminals.
That's right.
Yada yada yada. So we've left out dystopian stories and post-apocalyptic stories. However, I think it's worth mentioning them briefly to say that there is an implicit dystopianism in the worldview of this subgenre.
Yes.
Right. And also, I would say an implicit post-apocalyptic mentality too. It's like the dystopia is here. The apocalypse has already happened. Now we're just being honest about that fact and living by different rules.
Or the first season, maybe the first two seasons in particular of Walking Dead.
Yeah.
But no, I think part of what comes to mind in my political science brain kicks in. It's a particular version of the state of nature where it is a Hobbesian war of man against man. That if you don't have somebody to force us all to behave, life will indeed be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Or as I like to tell my classes, that's a bad blind date. But nonetheless...
And students, this will be on
one of my favorite.
This will
jokes.
Be on the final in Political Science 101.
Every year, that joke every year. Regardless, I mean, it is this notion that we have to be controlled. That there's no control otherwise.
Yeah,
and maybe only the most virtuous of us can control and also have the right to mete out this justice.
Yeah.
So
because we live in a dystopia or an apocalypse by another name.
So
just a nuclear bomb hasn't gone off, but we live in a horrible world.
But I'm going to go there now because it fits. I mean,
man.
It's the same notion, right? That we currently see in contemporary politics, wherein the president and his coterie of justice warriors are saying that the cities in particular, especially ones that happen to be run by Democrats, but the cities are hellholes, that they're war zones, they're hellscapes, that Portland's on fire, that Chicago is a hellhole, to use the exact term that's been used. And it is this, and it's the conception that we get from Batman and Gotham in particular, but Daredevil and Hell's Kitchen, or a lot of these stories where cities are just rife with crime, and the only thing you can do is deploy violence, whether it's Batman or whether it's Daredevil's billy clubs or whether it's deploying the National Guard, that this is the only way in which you can calm it. Now, this all runs counter to reality because cities are not hellholes and full of crime.
Right.
And in fact, often crime rates in smaller places are worse than in larger places, but that requires some math and no one wants to do that. But and not that there isn't, I want to be clear about something in case because I don't want to offend anybody or to to downplay. Crime is real. There is real crime in the world and in the United States and in cities and in small towns and in rural areas. Crime is a reality, and people are victims of crime. So I'm not saying that's not the case. What I am saying is that the notion that the solution to crime is simply the deployment of force and violence, and that just will solve the problem, is just not true, right? Empirically not true. And it's worse when you deploy that violence in a way that is against things that aren't even actually happening. Portland is not on fire, in case anybody's wondering. And I will never. The very week, or within a week of Trump saying that Chicago was a hellhole, somehow they played Monday Night Football in Chicago, and it all went off just fine. And they were showing this picture of the Bean in Millennium Park, and I'm like, yeah, that Chicago is the worst, man. It's the worst. But it's nuts.
It's a very persistent myth. And,
yes, it is.
And
it's a very persistent.
You have to actually, and I think that what we're talking about here is we're delineating what the myth is. At least it's one of its manifestations here in comic books. And there's another question like, why is it so persistent? But it is something that some people want to believe in.
Look, I watched, and I don't watch the local news every night because the local news is kind of not well done. And plus I get it through the internet, but I watched the local newscast last night, and the first 3 stories were about crime. And I understand why that's on the news. It was about, a trial about this very terrible story where a local owner of a chain of dry cleaners had some guy stalk him and then break into his business and beat him up so he'd open the safe. And it's just terrible. It's a terrible story. And if you've been the victim of that crime, where you saw that crime, you might think that maybe having the Punisher show up and unload some justice is not a bad idea, I suppose. But that's. And I can't remember the other ones. The other ones were a couple of the trial and some of the crime they're still investigating. We had a shooting downtown a couple of weeks ago. Terrible. No, there's terrible crimes, and people see the crime and they get fearful, and it's understandable. And it's easy to want an easy solution.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about some of the things that we read, and what I'm springing a surprise on you.
Okay.
I propose, if you're okay with it, giving what we read a letter grade for how much we liked it. And I don't think this is merely a question of just like our particular idiosyncratic tastes, but just how good were these as comics?
Right.
Okay, so you put down the Daredevil run by Frank Miller.
I think it's an A+.
Yeah, it's great.
The art's great, the writing's great, the story, it's great. And it refreshes a book that I never cared about.
Okay. The Wolverine miniseries by Claremont and Miller.
I think at the time I would have given it an A+. I think now I want to give it more like an A-, maybe B+. It's entertaining, but it felt kind of cringy in its attempt to. I don't believe Chris Claremont is an expert on Japan the way he thinks he is. How about that?
Oh, hell no. And I didn't realize that at the time, but I know a lot more about Japan now than I did then.
Yeah.
It's kind of embarrassing, but anyway.
And the story is it's okay. It's okay.
It's okay. Yes.
Maybe it's B+. I'd say B+.
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting diversion from the norm of a superhero story.
I like the art.
Yeah. How about the first couple appearances of the Punisher?
It's sort of a C.
Yeah.
It's kind of mid.
Yeah. I mean, it was so the 70s were an era of a great deal of mediocrity in Marvel Comics. You know, a lot of really dumb villains. And very, kind of lazily written stories. A lot of the art wasn't that great. There's nothing about the Punisher that made that character stand out from that particular landscape. How about the Punisher series from the 1980s? Did you ever read that? I reread it
I don't think I read that one. I did read.
So this is the one that was drawn by Mike Zeck.
I'm aware of it. I did not read it for this. I may have even read it at the time. I don't know that I did though.
They were wildly popular at the time. Like the resale value of these were, and this is where the Punisher really does become not a villain.
Right.
Or,
That's right.
unless,
I think I read them at the time. But
yeah. And I think at the time enjoyed them. Rereading them, they were okay. I would give them actually a C.
okay.
I think they were trying very hard to like make villains that would justify what the Punisher was doing and him infiltrating. And anyway, it was just not as good as I remembered.
I will
Uh,
say, by the way, that you're really scratching my professorial itch. I haven't been able to grade anything for a while, so this is fantastic. Keep going.
Excellent. Okay. I also read Punisher Warzone, which was a later series
Yeah, I
from the
looked at that.
90s.
I gave
I
it
would
an
give that
F.
I'd give that an F. It was terrible. It
It's
was
just-
absurdly violent.
yeah.
It just
Yeah.
like people like the heroes and villains were all like a foot or two taller than everybody else, massively
Yes.
muscled, giant guns they're walking around with.
There's a particular 90s art style. I just do not like it. It's like weirdly cartoonish, but not in a way that
Yeah,
I don't know. It's
but it's very hard to put into words what you're describing.
it is.
It is sort of almost fascistic
Hmm.
aesthetic to it
Yeah, yeah.
and ethos.
Say what you will
Okay,
about the tenets of National Socialism, at least it was an ethos.
Lisa, there you go. The Venom Punisher limited series, Venom Funeral Pyre from the 1990s. I did read this at the time because I was not very careful about what comics I had put on hold. Had you ever read this before?
No, I only glanced at it just a little while ago. That was ridiculous.
So this
Um,
is the F where you want to pull the student aside after class and try to help them see that there's something wrong with them.
that's right. It reminds me of a Charlie Brown cartoon where Peppermint Patty gets a Z minus. She goes, "That's not a
Uh,
grade. That's sarcasm." But yeah, that's great. Yeah.
So, and I really want to key in on this because I think it really does show how lazy a
Hmm.
lot of these efforts were. So, Venom is in Oakland, which is drawn as if it's New York City.
Hmm.
He's swinging around these skyscrapers and so forth. This person has never been to Oakland. Whoever wrote it, whoever the writers and artists were. There is this street gang of punks
Yes.
because that is the correct word to use in this particular context, that has an investigative reporter who's infiltrated them, and they're trying to constantly get him to do something criminal to kill somebody. And then the Punisher shows up in a minivan
Yes.
with a mini gun on the
Yes.
top and just starts spraying bullets everywhere.
That's one does.
And he also conveniently has like this sound generator that's able to cripple Venom, and there's the first couple of issues like how is Venom going to overcome this device that effectively robs him of his superpowers. It was garbage, garbage, garbage. The kind of garbage that you should just like ask yourself when you submit the final art and the lettering of the script on into the voice balloons, like what am I doing in this job, creating this kind of just absolute effluvia. What did you think of it?
Just the part that I read was ridiculous. Yeah. Just ridiculous.
All right, we already talked about the ghostwriter from the 70s. I would give that a D.
I was going to say a D. It's a solid D.
A D. Just just the big beefy motorcycle gang leader who was like the chief villain for a while.
The art was just terrible, and I really, like I said, it was just
The writing was uninspired.
yeah. Yes, that's
Okay.
that's a kind way of putting it. Yes.
The early Lobo appearances in Omega Men, I would give that a C.
Yeah, I only vaguely remember that stuff, and I did not re-review it, so I couldn't say.
Yeah, I mean, I was an on again, off again Omega Men reader. And so at the time, I remembered the Lobo character who dressed very differently than he did later on. Like he was in this purple and yellow spandex outfit, not the motorcycle thug gear that
Yeah,
became his costume later. But I mean, he was a scary assassin, but that was kind of about it. The Lobo limited series from sometime later, like there's a 4 issue miniseries that I wrote, was one of
you
the
wrote
most.
it. I'm sorry.
Sorry, no, I'm saying what am I saying? Keith Giffen wrote it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
One of the most over the top, ultra violent comics
Mm.
I remember having read at the time, and it's still pretty high on the list on the reread.
I had the last thing I saw with Lobo was like with Supergirl. It was some years ago now, but there's some Supergirl stuff with Lobo.
Yeah. But it was
But
again just trying to I don't know what actually the author was trying to do, Keith Giffen, the writer, but it seemed like it was trying to rattle everybody's cage.
mm,
Oh, let's be transgressive. Let's have Lobo saw the legs off an old lady, and he was the one who killed everybody else of his species. And it just at the time I remember reading it, thinking, what am I wasting my time on this for? There's no interesting story here. The wink and a nudge from the author here is
right,
sort of the wink and the nudge about something truly ugly.
right.
Um, anyway, I would give that enough.
Fair
Sorry,
enough.
folks, if you're a Lobo fan. The question we mentioned, the Benny O'Neill written question from the 19.
Yeah. My recollection was in the A category. And then when I reread the first several yesterday, I really probably give it more of a B plus B.
Yeah, I would too, and in part because I think the attempt to try to depict the villains
Hmm.
as being particularly nasty, I thought it came off badly. Like Denny O'Neil had done a great job being a Batman writer for a long
Right,
time, and when he was trying to like make the uh, this minister who was controlling city
right,
government from
right.
behind the scenes and so forth, and he was this guy who took the wrong lessons away from being a Vietnam vet. Um,
So much of that
anyway,
going on.
yeah,
That was
that
the
no,
theme for a while.
it just wasn't well executed. It wasn't like there was something that couldn't be worked with there. It was like the raw
Right.
material of something was there, but it just wasn't well executed.
And I will say, I don't think the art is aged as well as I thought it was.
Okay, so I'm going to skip past something here, which definitely I think is not worth talking about. But
Okay.
I would say, kind of more recently, like recently, like a few years ago, I read the Injustice series from
Hmm.
DC. One of many bad Superman stories.
Hmm.
Of course, there are the other, ones that aren't literally Superman, like The Boys, but
Right.
it's
Right. Right.
clearly it's intended to be a stand.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Homelander is a stand-in for Superman, but this
What?
one,
Okay.
which was connected to a video game where the
Yes.
Joker kills Lois Lane, or actually causes Superman to kill Lois Lane inadvertently, and then he becomes the chief villain.
Hmm.
Anyway, lots of mayhem
Yes.
ensues. Superman does continue to kill people, or maim them, or cripple them, or
Right.
whatever. I I would give it a B. The
Hmm.
writing was better than I expected,
I
but
think I only read the
also like
first couple.
it went on way too long.
Yeah. Yeah.
It wasn't like one of those Elseworld series that, like in
Hmm.
four special
Right.
edition comics, wrapped up a story. It just kept going on and on and on.
I don't have enough of a recollection to give that one a grade.
Okay, yeah, okay. So that's what we read. These are the heroes that we're talking about. This is the definition of dark superheroes. So let's get to
Hmm.
the big questions.
Okay. Why? No.
Why? Why is this so dark? How much black ink have you used up, Frank Miller? Uh, did we like these comics at the time?
What I liked was I liked the Daredevil stuff. I still do. I liked Wolverine more then than now, but I still like it. I liked Swamp Thing. I like The Dark Knight Returns, although I have my critiques that we
Yeah.
talked about a couple of weeks ago, months ago, however long ago. But I never, the rest of it, I never cared for Venom. I never cared for the Punisher. Ghost Rider was never my thing. I like the question was fine. I liked the question at the time, but this is the line, right? I think the line for me is I like the aesthetic, more serious storytelling that may be a little closer to reality with the violence, but not. I don't like the superhero being the executioner. I just don't never have liked that.
No. Yeah, I didn't enjoy them at the time. I think probably I'll add to the list of the things that I did like. Some of the other Batman limited series, like Batman the Cult, that was written by Jim
Hmm.
Starlin,
Yeah, yeah.
we've talked about before. Those were certainly good, or the very dark tone of like the Elseworlds with Batman kind of living in this autocracy of religion, and kind of like the British Empire had never gone away, and it had taken this very kind of Christian dominionist turn. That was good. That was good. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed Superman Red Sun, which was
I think
had its dark elements.
Dark setting is one thing, right? It's just dark heroes. Truly dark heroes is another, I guess.
Right, exactly. It's because you're not like saying it's okay to internalize the ethos that we're talking about. And I just thought that not only were like a lot of the comics in the 90s badly written, but they just seemed so freaking juvenile.
Yes.
Just like the rebooted Ghost Rider, just again, just by dressing people up as as motorcyclists, the traditional black leather gear and so forth. The same thing that they did with Lobo doesn't make you cool, right? Except if you're a 12-year-old boy, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, that's the weird part, right? I mean, it's kind of what I was talking about earlier in the episode. There was this movement, there's a clear movement where the comic book publishers understand that their audience is actually older than they thought that it was, or they're not writing for 8-year-olds. Maybe they were writing for 17-year-olds. Maybe they're writing for 24-year-olds. But there's this weird mix, especially in the 90s, where they ramp up the sex and the violence, but they dumb down the stories in some way. It's a worst of both worlds kind of thing.
Yeah. I think Venom Funeral Pyre needs to be put on a funeral pyre. All
You're not
physical copies of
book burning, are you?
Oh my God, what a hypocrite I am. Okay. And I think we've already answered the next question. Do we feel differently about them now than we did when we were younger? For me, no. I mean,
I hate them more now. I don't really feel that different, to be honest. Yeah.
And I don't think it's because we haven't grown up. That couldn't be. Well, that couldn't possibly be.
No, there's no
chance that we're just overgrown adolescents. It's just, I think it's always been
it's
problematic for me.
No. And in fact, I think it's become more problematic. Like I said, I even occasionally wonder about some of the stuff that's not so dark in terms of its implications. So yeah, I mean, I don't need that kind of darkness.
Yeah. So it's
not my old friend, and I don't want to talk to it again. Anyway. Go ahead.
Yes, and I don't listen to The Darkness either. Tony Blair's favorite band. Okay, so is there another word than dark that you would use to describe them?
Homicidal?
Nihilistic?
Nihilistic's a good word. Fascistic?
Fascistic, yeah.
Yeah.
Because like if you go through a lot of the definitions of fascism, or like people like Umberto Eco trying to describe the fascist mindset, there is this like the purity of violence and kind of the regenerative qualities of violence. Anyway, I think that certainly definitely treads into fascistic terrain.
Yes.
Are all dark superheroes the same?
I don't think in the way that we've talked about them, no.
Yeah.
Again, Daredevil, Batman, The Question are different than The Punisher, Spawn, and Venom.
Yeah. If you occupy a world that's a meaner place, that doesn't mean you have to become a meaner person.
That's right.
Think. Yeah. So there are these different strata of dark superheroes.
My grandmother used to say, there's just so much meanness in this world. Anyway. Sorry, that just made me think when you said that.
What did you call your grandmother?
Grandmother.
Not Mima.
Nope.
You are from the South.
That's right.
You live in the South now. God, if somebody in my family suggested when I became a grandfather, like, you want to be called Peepaw? I think that is the last thing I want to be called.
What is your grandpa name?
Grandpa.
Okay, there you go.
So were the 90s and the 80s a particularly dark period? Was this just a fad, or has this continued to the present day?
Oh, I think it's continued. I think the 90s in particular, I think we've noticed is sort of the peak of this. I think the 80s was more the better version of this emerged in the 80s, and that somewhat continues. I think the part that the legacy of a lot of this is learning the wrong lessons, which is, again, the Snyderverse DC movies are just too damn dark, both in what they look like and in the way the characters behave. And, there's a contrast between Snyder's Superman and James Gunn's Superman. And I think part of it is ditching some of the darkness. Is it not?
Yeah, or Deadpool for that matter. Just because he's funny,
yes,
doesn't make him any less dark.
That's right.
Would you compare dark superheroes, we could talk for a moment about other genres, to war movies or war comics? War comics were once a big thing, or, where there's a lot of violence in war comics.
So,
TV shows like Combat back in the 60s.
So I think that the comparison I made, which I've already kind of made, which is the main comparison that I would make are to either films in which the character has been driven because of some injustice to deploy violence, like Bronson, and I'm blanking on the movie. It was on your list.
Death Wish.
Death Wish. There's a whole genre of movies in which normal people feel the need to use violence against those who have victimized them. I never cared for that. I understand the catharsis is supposed to go along with that, but it was never my thing. Or again, cop shows or movies where cops have to be renegades for justice because the system's broken, and by golly, they're the ones that should be allowed to fix it. Those are the parallels to me. War movies, war comics, war stories, at least war in theory is taking place in the context of a broader kind of violence that requires, at least in some cases, using violence to combat violence, or in theory, at least, some sort of legal framework for that violence. But when you get outside of that legal framework, then things get a little dicey. And again, I'll go ahead and say it, right? If we're going to blow up boats in the Caribbean because we think they might be drug dealers, that's not, in my mind, acceptable, and is an illustration of what I'm talking about, the assumption that easy violence solves complicated problems.
Right.
And that we know who is the bad guy and how to deal with them, and the best way to deal with them is to vaporize them. And that's, to me, a follow-on of this more dark attitude about justice. That justice equals violence.
Right.
So in that sense, I deviated from your question, but anyway.
No. I mean, I would say definitely not. I mean, because they, like with war movies, or the war comics like Sergeant Rock, and others, there are rules of engagement, right? There are actual enemies, and
that's right.
There are people who are managing violence.
That's right.
Not just the person who decides to drive around with a minivan with a minigun on top. It's different.
No, although by contrast, as you pointed out earlier, I think things like the later Rambo movies or Cobra are these movies where like a mercenary-like character is involved. It's not that different than the Punisher, if not exactly like the Punisher, really.
So how would you compare these to James Bond, who's effectively an assassin? He's not a secret agent. He's not a spy, really. He's
James Bond is. Well, is he though? I mean, he's licensed to kill.
Right.
I'm trying to think.
He does a lot of killing.
He does a lot of killing. He does. Well, and again, I'm not defending. I'm just sort of thinking out loud. But it does illustrate the way global context affects pop culture. The early Bond movies, which would have been Sean Connery, George Lazenby, and Roger Moore, are all Cold War movies.
Yes.
Right? But then
to a point,
but they take place
during the Cold War, but the adversary isn't always Soviets.
But even Spectre is sort of, I think, coded in some ways as pro Soviet sphere. I don't know. We could argue about that. I suppose.
It's saying that there's a shadow war going on.
Yeah.
That the normal institutions aren't really set up to handle.
Right.
You need somebody who can carry out extrajudicial violence,
right? I guess the point I'm trying to make, which is what doesn't necessarily fully encompass the actual internal logic of all the films or the books, is the pop culture of the 60s and 70s and 80s that took place in the context of the Cold War, any international thriller was at least partially in that backdrop. You could pretend, whether you should have or not, I'm not making a moral judgment at this point. I'm just trying to think through this thought that the actions are justifiable because we're in a Cold War, right? That the war frame creates a certain kind of moral permissiveness within the context. But then you get the later James Bond movies, like the one that I can't remember the name of it. I think it was a Timothy Dalton movie. And then all of a sudden the bad guy was a drug cartel.
Yeah.
And he quits for a while to basically go on a vengeance run because his wife is killed. They just get married and the wife's assassinated. And which one is this? License to Kill? I can't remember.
It could be. I don't remember the Timothy Dalton movies that well.
I saw it at the theater. I remember Sharon and I went to see it. And it just was kind of a turnoff because it just felt like vengeance, not justice or international relations or whatever you want to call it. I mean, so in Bond, therefore, I think kind of it varies, right? I mean, all of this stuff can be problematic without any doubt. So yeah, they could fit. My thought has trailed off now, and I'm thinking about.
Well, anyway, you're not going to get a grand jury indictment for Spectre. Enough said.
No, that's true.
How about film noir and hard-boiled fiction? So these are things I'm really steeped in.
Yeah.
And I would say no. Because like a lot of the underlying philosophy of film noir is ordinary people sometimes put into situations where they morally collapse.
Right.
Or they're in situations where there are nasty people and hidden plots and so forth going on, and they're trying to navigate their way through a dark world. Kind of, I'm thinking like The Third Man there, or like the previous sort of story, the moral collapse of somebody would be like Double Indemnity.
Right.
That's not this story at all.
No, I don't think so.
Right. And I don't think Sam Spade or Philip Marlowe as hard-boiled detectives really fit the frame either.
No, I think that's true. I mean, most of that justice is low level too. It's fists, and sometimes people get shot. I understand, but I mean, it's just not the same.
It's not like the Punisher's war on crime.
No.
Yeah, or the Spawn killing people. Wasn't it he was trying to like drag souls back down to hell or something?
Yeah, that sounds about. I mean, I have not read any Spawn in a long time.
Yeah.
But yes.
Yeah, I wonder if there's like so how you would post that job on LinkedIn.
The soul sucker dude.
No, like there are demons loose in the world, and you have to drag them back down to hell. Anyway, just
you have to
maybe Spawn wasn't the best candidate for that position. I'm just saying. All right, I'm just trying to lighten the mood a little bit. Okay, what influence did these comics have on movies? I mean, you mentioned Snyder.
I think I just feel like it definitely influenced Here's what I partially think happened. I think that there was a moment in time when it was difficult to translate what comics looked like to the big screen.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the solutions, like in the X-Men movies, which is one of the early, truly successful movies of this genre, in my opinion, dark leather and dark was easier to do than the bright colored costumes.
Yeah.
Because when they'd been done in the past, it looked ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. Exhibit
A, DC's Legend of the Superheroes.
And listeners, we did an episode of this where we beat up on that particular special or specials.
Griped so much about this, but it wasn't dark and no one was murdered. So,
Yeah.
Anyway.
My DVDs remain intact. I have not done violence to them as much as I hated them.
You burned them. They might melt if you had enough copies of Punisher Funeral Pyre. You probably could.
There we go. Yeah, I could get things really burning.
Yeah. So, and I think also, again, there's this faux seriousness that comes along with the darkness.
Yeah.
That did influence a lot of comic movies because they were trying to be serious movies. Right. And so sometimes that meant, I mean, again, the Batman movies fit in this pretty well, I think.
Yeah.
Some of them more than others. Just we're going to be dark and broody and, grim dark.
Hmm.
What about you? What do you think?
I think that they have. I think that, for example, some of the lesser movies, like I haven't seen a lot of the Sony Spider-Verse movies,
I've
but
seen none of them.
the little I've seen certainly does seem to have borrowed a lot
I'm
from
pretty
this
sure that it
mindset.
would require a Clockwork Orange type of device to get me to watch some of those movies.
I mean, you wouldn't watch Madam Web just for the MST 3K value.
Is it even worth that? That can't, what I've read suggests that maybe it's not even worth that. Maybe.
I think we need to put that to a test with a watch party, frankly. Because we're not in the same geographic location, but technology allows us to watch
Textile does
really
allow us to,
terrible
yeah.
movies together.
I mean, we've not done anything to try to, raise any funds to pay for this enterprise. So if people want to pay for a Patreon to make us watch Madam Web, I might be down.
Please bribe us to watch
That's
Madam
right.
Web.
That's maybe what it takes.
Okay. So here's a question I don't think we can really answer, but I just think it's worth posing. Are these comics coarsening? Yeah. Do they corrode us a little bit? Or are they just violent fantasies that people play at and don't really have any real world consequences? This is the Tipper Gore question.
Oh yeah, let's put a bringing back the comics code.
Is there any consequence at all? Is it just that we could say, well, we don't like that. This is garbage. We're not going to buy these comics. We can ignore them.
Well, look, I think there's certainly examples and where some of this stuff is sort of bled into the broader culture. The Punisher comes to mind in particular. His skull logo has become adopted by
Right.
both some people in law enforcement, which is disturbing, and it's also ironic since the Punisher hates cops apparently, but also just sort of that kind of iconography that some people revel
Hmm.
in. And of
Yeah.
course, to include these days the head of the FBI and his challenge coin very much is inspired by
Hmm.
that logo. Not that I would blame Cash Patel on Jerry Conway and the Punisher, but I mean, part of it. These are always very difficult questions to ask. I think that in some ways, it's all their culture. Well, it's self-reinforcing, but some of this is a reflection of pop culture in general, or our culture being, manifests in these stories. And then part of it is, yeah, I think that when I say, like I said, a while ago in this podcast, that part of me could say to myself that maybe this kind of fiction, if you think about it too much, has a definite dark side to it, and that some people do internalize this notion that easy violence is easy justice. It's not just comic books that provide that kind of notion, though. It's a prevalent notion.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what do you think about? I mean, what are your thoughts on?
So I would say I can't really make a causal link here
All
to
right.
say that these comics, like violent video games or other
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
bugbears that go at least as far back as Frederick Wertham and Seduction of the Innocent, that I don't necessarily think that that's a straight line from the depiction of awful things to people behaving awfully.
Yeah, no.
I think that when somebody enjoys something a bit too much,
Yes.
like I'm not a fan of slasher films. If other people are fans of them, are fine. If that's the only thing that you watch, I think you do need to sit yourself down and interrogate yourself a little bit about why
Hmm.
that particular violent fantasy is so appealing to you. And if devotion to this mindset is not just consistent, but also very public. We
Right.
mentioned Cash Patel,
Yes.
the Punisher coin, right? If it's not like, oh, you're some police detective and in the bottom drawer of your desk at work, you've got the Mike Zeck, miniseries that came out in the 80s and you pull it out and read it every once in a while and you enjoy it. That's one thing, right? But if, you're saying we should have more Punishers,
Yes.
and I'm the head of the FBI,
Yes.
saying that. That's definitely problematic to be euphemistic about it.
Oh, I mean, some people draw on any number of things in a way that is uncomfortable. And we've made passing references, I think, on the podcast. I know we've talked about it privately about the way in which certain very wealthy people have taken weird lessons from science fiction, right?
Yeah.
The
Didn't
fact
read
that,
it correctly at all.
yeah, so I mean, you can't fix that. I mean, again, it's a little creepy that the Peter Thiel, Alex Karp co-founded company Palantir. I mean, Palantir. I understand it sounds cool, but the Palantirs in Lord of the Rings, while at one point they were perfectly acceptable devices, become quite corrupted. And the
Yes.
notion that a company that would help the U.S. government sort through large, vast amounts of data to try to locate bad guys and call it Palantir is a little creepy. And then, of course, Alex Karp thinks of himself as Batman, and I would encourage. He calls his office Gotham, and there's this whole product from Palantir. Google it, look at it. It's kind of crazy. It's very science fiction looking, and not in a utopian kind of way. This thing called Gotham, that it's a set of software tools that I guess the U.S. government's using. It's sort of interesting, but it's an illustration that some of these ideas can be taken to the extreme. I mean, but again, I would circle back and be quite clear about something. I don't believe that D&D leads to human sacrifice. I don't think listening to rock and roll makes you bite the heads off bats. I don't think that playing violent video games makes you a mass murderer. I don't think that reading The Punisher makes you into a violent person. I think I think there's just two things here, right? I mean, there are certain things that influence certain kinds of people, but I think they're already predisposed to a certain kind of behavior. An obsession, yeah, I would be concerned if at this point, not that I have any, but if I have a grandchild someday who's obsessed with certain kinds of culture, that would be a red
Yeah.
flag to pay attention to. But I'm not going to freak out if I find out that because again, it's always easy to, especially when it's something that you're not familiar with, to see some kind of pop culture thing and freak out about it. But I don't think it's causal. I think sometimes
No.
there's a correlation sometimes with certain preferences and certain kinds of media consumption. I do have this sort of deeper concern, although maybe concern is too strong a word. It is. There's a degree to which I do have some worry about broader stories and what it reflects about American culture in particular. That, again, to use a phrase I've used a couple of times now, that easy violence equals easy justice.
Right.
It's not just in comic books. And I think it is something that we struggle with because it just seems like it should be the case,
Right.
but it just isn't.
Yes. Okay. I also wanted to mention before we wrap up, I found an interesting LA Weekly article. Sorry, LA Review of Books article. Did you have a chance to read that?
No, I did not.
Uh, that said that dark superheroes are one side of the kind of overt criticism of traditional superheroes.
Okay.
Yeah, as we said, that the world's a nastier place.
Right.
You can't pull
Right.
your punches.
Right.
It's ridiculous from that point of view, and that camp, which we talked a lot about, camp
Yes.
like Batman, the
Yes.
60s TV series, is also ridiculing superheroes, but in a different way. Just saying,
Right.
isn't this silly that
Yes.
that this mythical American city, stand-in for New York, has these costume crime fighters who help the police deal with these outrageous villains. How ridiculous is it from that standpoint? But
Right.
ridiculous in a ha-ha sense, not
Right.
ridiculous in
Right.
the
Right.
pounding your fist on the table saying, we've got to be tougher on the criminals.
Right. 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 Well, I mean, and again, we didn't touch on it, but I mean, there is a critique, and I think it's part of what generates some of these stories, that maybe you should kill the Joker because he's a mass murderer, and every time he gets let out, it becomes a utilitarian calculation that, when you go beyond Frank Castle showing up and just spraying a neighbor with bullets, maybe these guys are doing a disservice and an injustice by not like Daredevil's question about Bullseye. It's a
Yeah.
legitimate moral question. Um, you know, do you do do you time travel back and kill baby Hitler? Who can say? But it is this question, right? Or there are people that deserve to die, arguably, but who should be making these choices? And so I understand that sort of argument, right?
Yeah, so I understand the argument, and yet I want to kind of then, kind of end on this note that no, they're not ridiculous. Superheroes, I think, are a commitment to ideals. It's
Right.
that, and those ideals can be real. You can administer justice,
Yeah.
albeit imperfectly.
Yeah.
We don't have a perfect system of justice, not just because criminals sometimes go free, but there are other defects built in. Uh, However, the people who do put the work into doing a good job at it, who do have the dedication to being careful about what they do, not sloppily framing people, because it's easier to plant a gun on somebody than it is to go through the normal police work in order to present a case to, ultimately to a jury. To have those deliberative organizations, whether it's an appeals court or a jury of your peers or a grand jury or whatever, kind of deal with the problem that criminality has set up. The commitment to those sorts of things are laudatory, necessary, right? And it's laughing at it, in the way that
Hmm.
sometimes people do, or their impatience with it, is the opposite of the superhero who struggles like Batman with, okay, here I go putting the Joker away
Right.
again, or Daredevil saying, this Bullseye guy is going to kill a bunch of people, but I can't kill him.
Right. No, and having said my inner concerns about superhero stories, I'll do the flip side too. I mean, I think superheroes are, um, well, one, it's modern mythology, and it's
Right.
interesting in that regard, and it is a reflection of our culture and trying to think through, various aspects of our culture. But I think too, it is when you get things like to quote some cliches now, but it's worthwhile pointing out. The whole with great power comes great responsibility thing from Spider-Man, or really the way in which Superman was depicted in the most recent James Gunn movie, and has been depicted in many manifestations. This idea that if you have certain kinds of powers or insight or capacity, that you should try to use those things to improve the world around you, and not just mete out violence. Right? Maybe violence is what you have to use sometimes to accomplish your goals, but which is unfortunately true about all kinds of justice dispensing, right? I mean, I'm not a pacifist, and I certainly understand that violence is part of life,
Mm.
and sometimes it has to be deployed to defend from other kinds of violence. It's just, and I think really what we're getting at ultimately is maybe some amount of idealism about all of this, which is if we know that sometimes you do have to deploy violence, that if we could do so within a legitimate framework of justice, within some level of checks and balances and due process,
Hmm.
within some capacity of understanding that summary execution is almost never the right thing to do. That you can have then create a universe in which these activities can take place, whether it's governments or whether it's people from other planets.
Right. And I'm saying that if we wanted to have myths in our popular culture that inspire people or help people frame their thinking, or struggle with, situations which are fantastical, but nonetheless help us with real situations, I'd rather be inspired by Batman telling Robin, we just don't kill people,
Right. That's right.
or, the Fantastic Four saying, we're just not going to kill Doctor Doom, no matter how many
Yeah.
times he's threatened us personally, as well as the whole world, than the
Or
Punisher.
Galactus.
Yeah. Or, rather that than the Punisher driving around in a minivan with a minigun on top.
Uh-huh. It's yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay, so we're ready to wrap up. Our signature question at the end of all these episodes is, of course, what merch did you have and what merch did you wish you had? So what merch did you have?
None.
I had two things worth mentioning.
Okay.
One was there was I think I remember buying this because it was so ridiculous. And it made my daughter laugh because of its ridiculousness. So that was another reason to do it. There was a Venom action figure that was like a line of Marvel talking action figures.
Yeah.
And you pushed a button and Venom would say, "I'm going to eat your brain." And like how many times I pushed that button and heard Venom say, "I'm going to eat your brain." That had entertainment value. I was clearly, not embracing the dark superhero. I
think you were into the brain eating.
The other one I forgot about it until we were talking, which I remember was I actually did have a Punisher T-shirt.
Okay.
It was kind of silvery, the Punisher logo, but the reason I bought it was Halloween.
Okay.
When I was handing out candy, it seemed harmless.
Sure.
It wasn't, saying, "Hey kids, wouldn't you like a minivan with a minigun on top?" That wasn't the intent of buying that. Is there anything you wish you had?
So part of me wants to be contrarian and say no.
No.
But it ruins the whole signature
end of episode.
That's right. I thought about I've seen some, again, Ghost Rider was really my guy, but I can think of some like nice metal miniature Ghost Riders on the motorcycle with like a flame coming out the back. And I could see that. It is kind of cool looking, the flaming skull.
Yeah. And although I think we decided that the question really, it doesn't fit the dark superhero motif.
Yeah.
I think certainly at the time when I did occasionally buy a action figure to put in my office on the shelf at work and inspire someone to say, "What the heck is that?"
Yeah.
The question would have been a cool character.
Yeah, especially one that would have the like the smoke question mark around him.
Oh, that's great.
That would be good.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. His face would disappear when you sprayed it with water or something.
There you go. But all those, I was negative about the art and the comics, but the Bill Sienkiewicz covers were great.
Yes, they were. All right, folks. That about does it for this very deep and philosophical episode of Ancient Geeks. Thanks you all.
We'll pay attention to what the download numbers will be on this one. They'll be like lower. Who needs philosophy? Bring on the Planet of the Apes Part 2.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Bye.
As night falls on these mean streets, it's time for us to wrap up another episode of Ancient Geeks. Thank you for listening. You can find us on the podcast app or platform of your choice. Please subscribe and leave us a review. We're always welcome for the feedback. And if you want to give that feedback directly, you can send us an email at someancientgeeks@gmail.com. Look for our Substack blog, Some Ancient Geek, at substack.com, where we post regularly. And also, you can find us on Reddit, Facebook, Blue Sky, and other social media outlets. All content is copyright 2025, Tom Grant and Stephen Taylor. Music by Reversed Image, whom you can find on Pixabay. See you next time.
No! I give up! No, really! I give up!
And then what? Get some Weasley lawyer? Spend a year or two in prison and then you're back on the streets again? Sorry, in this war there's no surrender.
Help me! Please, somebody help me!